Good evening. Oh, look at that. It works. No feedback. How's the volume? Good. All right. I'm Angela Metler. I'm an administrative assistant in the president's office at South Dakota Mines. Welcome to Steam Cafe. We do this every third Tuesday. Steam Cafe is a partnership between us, Haycamp, and South Dakota Public Broadcasting. So we appreciate their support and we appreciate your support as well. We are broadcasting live on Zoom tonight, as we always do. So thank you to those of you who are attending online. At the end of the presentation, we'll do a Q&A session. So in the audience, feel free to ask any questions you might have. If you're online and you have a question, you can type it into either the chat box or the Q&A box, and we will make sure that it gets answered live. So without further ado, Patrick Dame, the Executive Director of Rapid City Regional Airport.
Thank you. Appreciate the welcome. Thank you, Angela, for the invite on this. We've had a short period of time to put it together, but I do a lot of public speaking. Forgive me, the lights are bright out here. I have a hard time seeing anybody in the crowd. So if you've got a question on something, wave it a little bit because this is bright. But I do a lot of public speaking, more so to legislative type crowds than to crowds like this. So I work to try and put together or divide up a couple different presentations in an effort to make it fit is in terms of the STEAM topics on that. I spend a lot of time with my board, and Dr. Rob Hall is the president of my board, and he's been fantastic to work with on this from the School of Mines. So we appreciate our board and everything that they do for us. So we're going to talk a little bit today about the development of the new additions to the airline terminal and all the different things. If you've been out to the airport recently, you've seen some of the things going on out there and some of the development that's happening. Just as kind of a precursor to it, to kind of give you the lay of the land, we consider this section of the terminal the head house, and then we have the concourse area that sits out in this particular area. We've been working to design a project that's going to add on to the terminal to get more gate space into the future. But right now, the biggest piece that we need to address is the head house of the terminal. When they built the head house in the 80s, it was never built. And anytime I refer to head house, it's this section right here. It was not built to be able to really expand on. We had some challenges that were there in terms of where they ran some of the storm sewer, where they ran some of the sanitary sewer. So we've created a 3-section project. And when you hear me refer to the sections of the project, I'll call projects, and phases of that project are phases of each one. So this is project 1 right here. This is project 2, and this is project 3. So just to kind of give you guys a lay of the land on the terminal as I go through the presentation. So as we looked at over the past 9 years, we're seeing on average right now a 20% increase in passengers. More so the last 2 years have been here 20% year over year increases. This year we're again on another record year. We've been able to add a considerable amount of additional air service to the terminal. You're seeing new flights to new locations that you haven't seen before. Even Allegiant expanding in Orlando was always one of the first, or one of the big topics or big cities that people were asking for. We were able to get that taken care of this year. But right now we serve more than just the Black Hills region. Our catchment area right now is about 200,000 people. We basically serve Western South Dakota, portions of Montana, Nebraska, North Dakota, and Wyoming. So we do pull people from a considerable amount, being the only commercial service airport in Western South Dakota. If you look at right now between Sioux Falls and Rapid City, the 2 major airports on each side of the state, we really do a good job of capturing the traffic for the state of South Dakota. Today, we pick up 95% of the total air service between Sioux Falls and Rapid City for all the air service that flies into and out of South Dakota. Now with that, we do leak quite a bit though, more so on the inbound. So one of the things that we changed when I got here was how we addressed our marketing. We used to market locally for people to fly out of here. We turned that on its head and we really started to think about it differently and started to market to major communities coming this way. Understanding that tourism is our number one market that we've got for the airport. And the local traffic is just not enough to really move the needle in terms of growth of the airport. Sioux Falls is more of a business market. So we don't compete as much with Sioux Falls. So we really do work well together between the two airports when it comes to legislative type agendas. But we've really seen growth based on finding communities of 1 million people and more in marketing for them to come to Rapid City during the months of tourism. And we're also using the tourism for the state of South Dakota and trying to pair up wherever we think it's possible to be able to get some growth. So based on that, what you'll see as we kind of roll through here, we've got a pretty hyper seasonal market. We do 65% of our traffic basically from May through September. The peak of that kind of being during rally. And just kind of in the pictures that I've got shown here, you can see some of the congestion related items that we've got. And we'll talk a little bit about why as we move forward in the presentation. We continuously work to get federal funding for this, but anytime you build a terminal, it's more of a local project than it is a federal project. So we'll be lucky if we can get about 50 to 60% federal funding into this project, where a lot of airport projects tend to be 90 to 95% eligible for federal funding. So I mentioned the growth that we've seen. If you start on the left side of the screen there, you got 2001 up to 2024, and this is a rolling 12 calendar months on this. So you can see just this year, the last 12 months, what we've seen in growth. We're going to exceed 400,000 passengers. I arrived in 2015, and this is kind of when we changed our philosophies and how we do things. You can see things were relatively flat. So we started to make a change in there. Obviously, you can see what COVID kind of did to us. Our impact through COVID was much less than many airports around the country. The wide open spaces, people wanting to get to, wanting to travel and still do some of those things. So we recovered far faster than many airports around the country, which was a good thing for Rapid City. As you can see, it fully out of the recovery. We had some pilot shortage issues in here that actually slowed a little bit of our recovery piece of it. But if you kind of look at the trajectory that we've got, you're seeing a pretty linear line of growth. And we show that that's going to actually continue as we move forward into the future here. I mentioned the hyper seasonality of our market. So if you look at, this is 2014, 2023, and 2024 as of August. And this is based on when we look at air service by month. And you can kind of see the hyper seasonal nature of our air service. So we really do peak in those summer months. Rally being our busiest time of the year, we start to roll into rally the end of July through the middle of August. Typically, we see passengers, a lot of family related passengers once the kids get out of school. As we get closer to rally, we start to see a transition in our clientele over to more of a biker clientele for that section of time. With that, kids typically go back to school right at the back end of the rally. So usually on the back end of that, we tend to see more of a retiree crowd, and we do see a lot more tourist type buses working through the airport, and we're really working to stretch that season. So the September, October time, basically through the Buffalo Roundup, which was what, 3 weeks ago now, we're trying to expand that market. We really had some success this year in getting some bigger airplanes and getting the airlines to hold the season. Total passengers this year, we're estimating to see about 808,000 estimated passengers through the terminal. That's both in and out. So we're about 404,000 passenger enplanements, or those people getting on the airplane. So what are the key factors for the things that we're trying to solve for, or what's changed? When you look at aircraft sizes right now, what we're seeing is for a good term for being in a brewery, we're finding that the 50-seat regional jets are going to the beer can factory and they're not coming back. They're not parking them in the desert. They're repurposing the airplanes. They're going to make them into beer cans and they'll be done. So with that, with the retiring of the 50-seat jets, we're seeing more mainline aircraft coming in, more comfort, 737s, Airbuses coming into our market. So with that, we end up with some constraints to our hold room because they were never designed for, we have 3 gates on the end of the terminal. They're more so designed for a DC-9 of about 100 passengers, so 300 people. When you have 150 seats per airplane and 3 737s sitting around the end of the terminal, we end up with considerably more passengers sitting in that area, and we end up with some considerable congestion issues in the terminal for that. So wingspans are bigger on that. So as we look to kind of line them up, and this is a 2D, try to turn into a 3D picture. When you get larger airplanes, the wingspans get to be harder to get them up against the building, creating issues for us, which is decrease the number of our total parking places around the terminal for the aircraft as well. So we're transitioning over to regional jets. And we're continuing to see interest from the airlines about wanting to, again, do more in Rapid City. They're really starting to see what it is that we've got to offer in this. So some of the key issues that we were working to solve, our terminal TSA checkpoint is an issue for us today, and it's built on a slope. So if you're walking down the head house to the gate area, there's 18 inches difference between the two. So you have to walk down what we consider the bridge. It's not enclosed underneath. And TSA's equipment sits on that bridge. Even while we were going through this project, we were looking at just widening the bridge for this. But about partway through the design of the project, we were supposed to get all new TSA equipment. And the issue that we ran into with that is the new TSA equipment won't tolerate the slope that it sits on, and TSA has no solution to that. So we are seeing we've got older TSA equipment. We're seeing some breakdowns, and that's causing some problems for us and delays. One of our biggest ones was over 2 hours on the Saturday of rally. We had a major breakdown during rally. We've had a couple of them this year. We've been working for TSA to try and figure out ways that we can minimize that. But right now they don't have a lot of solutions for us. So it changed our design as we were looking at the design piece of the front of the terminal to, instead of widening the bridge, we had to create a new area on top of our bag makeup area. The other piece of it is when we built the building in the 80s, now the whole building and access roads and aircraft parking aprons, believe it or not, were about $20 million. Today we're talking about just project 1 being $85 million. Considerable difference in cost when you look at what it is that we can get out of it. But a lot of the work that you don't see, so if you think of eligibility for federal funding, the places that you can see are mostly eligible for federal funding. All the places where people work and the places that you can't see in the airport are not, which whether that makes sense or not, it doesn't matter. It's just the way that it is. So we haven't done a lot to that area, and it is basically like walking into 1985. When you see the people working back there, they have to do a lot of manual work. Most airports our size don't have the type of challenges, even airports smaller than us, because they're up to the current technology and we're not. And I'll show you a little bit more on that as we move forward. So we needed to solve that issue. We needed some additional concourse space for seating area. We needed to go through and look at our car rental business is our second largest business on the airport. They need more space. People, when they come out to the hills, they want to be able to go out to Mount Rushmore, so they want to rent a car and have that freedom to be able to do it. So we have found that, we do need to add some space for them as we move forward into the future, and that's project 3 in the process here. Also, post 9/11, we never really made any changes. So when you look at the ticket counter areas, we have a sawtooth ticket counter design. Most airports that you go to have flexible counters that are all in one line. They're able to expand and contract their operations if they need to. We have a sawtooth design, and in some of those sawtooth areas, the screening devices, there's 3 screening devices that are behind 3 of the ticket counters. Most airports, similar in size and even smaller, have a single room where they've got that, and it's far more efficient than our operation is. So when we have one device go down, it causes issues for us as well. So this is just some current pictures of our airline terminal from two different sides. And the reason why I bring this up is as we were going through the design process, at some point back in the 80s, we had an architect looking at this, and architecture is something that is, a very unique piece. Our terminal was designed to kind of mimic the hills. So the stair step structure through the middle of it is part of the hills. We did do an addition a couple years ago onto this section right here. We really made sure that section of the terminal was similar to the rest of it, so we didn't take away from the architectural intent. It was very important to me as we looked to design this one to ensure that we kept the same concepts that the architect had and the same pieces that they wanted was very important to us as we went through the design piece of it. I mentioned the sawtooth design. If you look up and down each side of the terminal, each of these areas is a cubby space for each individual airline. The problem that we end up with is it's not flexible. They can only handle so much. If I've got if I've got 250 seat airplanes coming in at a time and all those people are at the ticket counter at once, we have some pretty good lines that work out through there. And this kind of gives you an idea of how that sawtooth area works. And then the area that they have in the back of house to be able to process your bags, called the bag makeup area, is basically it's a 2-lane road through the back of it. So there's a lot of manual process that comes along with when they load your baggage. So we see this every day. They'll move in and out bag carts. This is United's space. They have a linear bag belt that comes in from the baggage screening device behind the ticket counter. And it comes along that bag belt. They push some bag carts in there, and then they manually unload everything onto these carts. And on weekends, United alone can have up to 7 flights in each bank. So they may have 7 flights at one time that they're trying to get ready for, and each flight has 1 to 2 baggage carts associated with it. So they're lined up all the way out the door in the summer months with bag carts, and they're manually loading all these things. This is a better shot of it empty with how they place them in there. But then the other challenge that we end up with is they're screening behind the ticket counter. In this case, it's Deltas. And if they put them on that linear bag cart or linear bag belt, if no one's in the back to pull bags off that linear bag belt, guess what happens? Screening stops up front. So normally in an airport our size, it'll go on to a belt, more of a carousel style belt like you see on the left. And just to give you for instance, Bismarck has been here for 15 years already with their bag belts. They have about 214,000 in plane passengers. As I mentioned, we're going to hit 408,000 this year, and we're pulling off of these linear bag belts that are here. Massive difference in efficiency, but yet we're running twice as many passengers through there. Same thing with, if I look at Minot, North Dakota, 164,000 passengers. They actually have 2 carousels for people to pull baggage off. And the nice thing is with the carousels is it'll fill in when there's an empty spot for the bags. The carousels continue to move, much like you pick them up off of the bag return. It would be a similar piece in back. Again, Fargo, they're actually moving towards their 2nd generation. They're adding onto their terminal to add more of these carousels in the back. So this shows you how far behind we actually are. And this is really our Achilles heel, is we have a hard time processing passengers and baggage to be able to get stuff ready to get out on the flight. So as we look towards the Project 1 piece of it, it's going to align the ticket counters up, much like you see in many other airports, and then there'll be a single belt line that runs along the back of the ticket counters, sending the baggage back to one screening room that'll have multiple screening devices. TSA is going to be able to be efficient within that space. They're not going to have 2 people for every machine. They can probably decrease their operation by half for their staffing levels. I mentioned, kind of when we get into a congested flight, maybe we've got 2 flights that have canceled and everybody has to get to the ticket counter at one time, you've got 300 people in line. That's what it starts to look like because the queuing space out in front is, we don't have enough between the ticket counters and the front of the building. So we'll end up sliding that back and then aligning those ticket counters to create an efficiency up front. Plus, we're going to add on to the east side of the building to add some additional ticket space. Now, we're minimizing the amount of ticket space addition on the east side of the building because we think ticketing is something that is going to continue to evolve and change over the years. I anticipate, as we go into more facial recognition and some of those things that might be a little bit controversial, but I think at some point it'll be acceptable and we'll get there. Dr. Hall will walk in and it'll start to identify Dr. Hall the minute that he comes through the door. And his check-in process will start first on his cell phone to when he walks through the building to identify him. He'll walk up to the ticket counter. Can I have your bags, Dr. Hall? He'll hand those over and he'll walk upstairs and go through the TSA checkpoint. And it'll be much more efficient and the ticketing operation will become less. So we don't think we're going to need as much in the arena of ticket counter additions that are there. Also, if we make them common use, we can expand and contract the operations as the space is needed. So the airlines will just log into their system and it'll be just a common use system. Once they log in, the back screen will say their brand, the machines will say their brand, and you'll be able to use that airline's amount of space that they're taking care of. So we end up making it much more efficient than each one having their own space. And as we get more carriers into the future, which we foresee happening in the coming years here, we're going to need that flexibility. So when we look at the scheduling piece of it, I mentioned the summer part of the schedule. You can kind of see the larger part of the pie here. Everything else is kind of evenly spaced. As we look towards the, today for our carriers, we've got United, Delta, Allegiant, American, and Sun Country. Sun Country being summer seasonal. As we move towards the future, we do see some growth, but we're only as good as our busiest days. So we have to, measure the terminal's capability based on peak hour. So I can only process so many passengers through the head house in any peak hour piece of it. So right now today, we run a peak hour, basically peak in the summer, we're looking at about 394 passengers an hour. And this past summer, and also in 2019, when we set our first major record, we were having problems keeping up with that 394 passengers, and any little hiccup would cause the operation to see doubling in delays. One machine goes down at the checkpoint to be able to screen through, and it doubles the amount of wait time that we have almost immediately. So we see lines going then all the way out to the patio that's up above. Well, as we move towards the future, we know that that's going to increase primarily on the weekends, with the weekends being our busiest time of the day. So within our planning schedules, we look out to 2030 on this. We are actually going to get to about 752 passengers an hour that we need to be able to process in an effort for people to be able to make their flights on time. If we can't, there'll be delays, missed flights for people. We do foresee in 2030 a strong likelihood that you may see a Southwest Airlines in here. Chances are pretty good you'll see Alaska, Frontier, maybe Breeze, which is more of an East Coast carrier. Obviously we're showing JetBlue on here as well. So these are a little bit old in our forecast back from about 2021. But when we look at the schedule, we're going to need the ability to process over 750 passengers an hour. So we needed to look at designing the terminal in an effort to be able to do so. And we had to allow some growth on top of that. So part of the addition to the head house, this section of the head house, we had considered knocking down part of the area where the airlines are doing their bag makeup today. But the one thing that we found, and it was verified by the architect, is the building was made to lean against itself. It basically is structured down the middle. So if we tore one side off, there was no guarantee the front wasn't going to fall down. So that's a problem, right? But we did need some height in that area to be able to get bags up and around, to get them outside of the existing head house. So this section of building is what's under construction right now. And it's a lower garage area that basically takes up this entire section with a second story that will be the new TSA checkpoint. The checkpoint's going to be able to have 5 screening lanes, because again, we're building this once. We don't want to, so we may only need 3 today, but we know that we're going to need up to 5 in the future. We can hit the 7, basically the 750 number on 3, but this will get us the space to be able to add more devices, 15, 20, even 30 years from now, to have some extra space that's there. We'll also have some carousel. So this is actually a picture taken during rally this year, and literally the line did go clear over to, they're all zigzagged inside there, but then the line still made it over to the patio. So I think the delays at that time were almost 2 hours and 15 minutes. So we're trying to address correcting the slope in this, getting some additional lanes, but then also consolidating TSA. We're going to build some offices adjacent to the checkpoint. Currently, TSA has their staff in an office building down the street, essentially from the terminal. So they're not in the terminal. They don't actually have office space in the terminal building itself. So we'll be able to get their operation a lot more efficient with that. So this is just a picture actually from today. I apologize, my windows inside were a little bit dirty on the outside, but you can see the progress of the TSA checkpoint, how that's laid out. They're actually going to demolish a section of our office area for a period of time. That doesn't get replaced until project 3. So we're minimizing the amount of impact today. So this construction's taking place literally right outside my office window. But this will be the future checkpoint. Along the back, I mentioned there's an 18-inch slope. So we incorporated a slope that goes this way towards the old bridge. So when you're there, you can really see the difference in how the bridge slopes away from the new section of building. This is a shot from underneath. There'll be 2 long carousels, basically along this section of columns right here, that will allow bags they'll get screened, they'll spit out to the back, and they'll land on these 2 long carousels, and employees will be able to grab the bag and slide it right into a cart. A lot less manual operation, a lot safer for the employees to be able to get their work done, far more efficient for us to be able to turn traffic. We did have to make some changes through the process because TSA, the smallest baggage screening area that they're really designed for is for 1 million passengers. So we do have the ability to be able to add more screening equipment into this at a later date. But we started with a much smaller design that's more suited for airports less than 1 million passengers. And we're going to find that's going to save us about probably in the neighborhood of $15 million today, with the ability hopefully to be able to add more in the future. This is just a section of the outside of the terminal to give you a bearing here. Gate 1, for those of you who typically fly American, is right here. We had to do the storm sewer and the sanitary sewer ran through the middle of that section of building and ran underneath the bridge. So we had to tear out a considerable amount of aircraft parking apron in an effort to reroute that further to the north along the building through a section that's going to remain open after the project. So we ended up having to replace, some of the aircraft parking apron out there, which is quite thick. It's 18 inches of concrete on top of 6 inches of compacted asphalt on top of about 18 inches of base course. So you've got a pretty good section of base and hard surfacing that we had to dig out, remove. Now, a lot of that was vintage 1985, so it's needing to be replaced anyways. So we did replace. Gate 1 sat in the dirt for most of the winter. For those of you who looked out that direction, Gate 1's been closed for a considerable period of time. It's now back open. They're starting to put the Exterior, these are all brick walls, and they're starting to put the exterior brick veneer on the back part of the bag makeup area. And this is the TSA checkpoint area you can see up top. So as we move towards, we're still working towards project one. Currently, what we have bid is roughly $30 million worth of work. We have another $50 million to bid as part of project one for a total of about $80 to $85 million. Once we finish that, we'll move on to project two. And at no point really does project one make the airport a lot of money. It's not a lot of rentable space. It's the heartbeat of the terminal. It's what's going to make us, be able to process what we need for project two. As we move into project two, they'll tear a portion of the end of the terminal off to be able to make a turn, to turn the end of the terminal building in perpendicular towards the runway. So we're currently right now, we're kind of at two different angles. So we're going to turn in perpendicular. But then they need to widen the amount of space at the end of the terminal. So I mentioned today when we start to look at 150 seat airplanes, we really have a space deficit when we look at about 10 square feet per person in being able to have enough room for people to sit. The current gate area is, the current gate area is fairly narrow. We'll widen that through this section to make it a little bit more comfortable. And then we plan on also relocating the restaurant and the gift shop to give them more space, and then putting a bar in at the very end of the terminal for people to be able to sit around. So that'll get us the additional space that we need within the gate area. Basically kind of got bar, concession here, concession here, concession here in the original section of the terminal, which will make some conversions on that space as well. So that'll get us up to, we're at 7 gates today and 8 parking places. It'll get us up to 12 gates when we finish that. This part of the addition right now is anticipated to be $100 million. When we move towards the project 3 portion, which will add on to the, basically add on to the west side of the building, that'll replace the admin space, but then also give the a decent addition to the car rental space. Right now, we've stopped design on that because again, we're concentrating on trying to get through project 1 and project 2. Project 2 really has the ability to expand the capability of the airport and actually get us some revenue generating space out of the projects. Again, this is just kind of more, this is level 1 area of the terminal, and level 2, just kind of some picture pieces of it. So with that, I know that's a lot of information pretty quick. I'd be happy to take some questions from the crowd here. I'm sure you guys have them. Go ahead. Yep. So you're going to see the first edition this next summer onto the parking. Now, everybody always asks the question of, are you guys going to build a parking garage? Yep, at some point we will. Right now today, when we look at the cost of a parking garage is about $68 million. So we're going to build as much surface parking as we can before we go to that next step of building a parking garage. We have been hitting capacity this year. This year's been different than every other year. Usually it's Thanksgiving and Christmas when we're hitting capacity. We've almost maintained capacity for the entire year because so it's caused us to have to really make a shift. The airport board approved a design a month or two ago, and we'll design over the winter, we'll bid in the spring, and we'll be adding on to the parking lot. We're also prepping, as we're digging out the building, we have about 4 feet of fill that had to be dug out of everywhere from the building. So you're seeing us bringing up the land for the 3rd parking lot on the opposite side of the return to terminal road. So you'll see us consistently at this point adding parking until we kind of hit that balance. So at some point there will be a parking garage, but just not right now when we're going through a lot of these expenses. I think I see one in the back. City. You know, any plans about flights between the two? Good question. If you couldn't hear the question, he's asking if there was plans to offer flights between Rapid City and Sioux Falls. Airlines today fly a hub and spoke network. So for them to consider a point-to-point service, flying between the two, they measure their service in passengers per day each way, or PDU. It's not going to generate enough movement between the two cities to justify what it is they would need to make that route profitable. Plus, they tend to want to fly to their hubs like Minneapolis or Denver. No one really operates in that point-to-point manner between small cities today, in models today. Could that change into the future? Absolutely. You know, the only thing really constant is change. So we'll see what, you'd have to see an airline start moving in that direction to do more point-to-point flying before you would see something like that be a possibility. If you're looking at a major population state, yeah, you may see some more of that. If you're looking at a very rural area, so other places where you would see some of that would be in essential air service markets. So what can happen, even what has happened in South Dakota in the past, is the government will put on a subsidy to fly between two small service cities. So let's just say, you know, I ran the Brookings Airport 18 years ago. We used to fly from Brookings to Huron and Huron to Omaha. Then we went from Brookings to Huron and Huron to Denver in the second year that I was there. Those are subsidized markets under the Essential Air Service Program, and they're created to create access, and the government is paying for that access. For-profit markets like Rapid City and Sioux Falls don't have the option of having that capability that's there. Now, we did have for a small period of time where we had a flight from Rapid to Chadron to Denver along there because it was a subsidized route for Chadron. And they wanted to be able to get some of those people in there and add a segment that would make it attractive for DOT to select that in their next bid. But that didn't happen. So we had that for a short period of time and it went away. So in most cases in the state of Alaska, and some of these other places where you have similar situated cities, when they were flying prop airplanes, you saw more of those kind of milk runs. Now that those kind of the smallest airplanes right now that are in the essential air service markets are getting to be jet service. So that's, even those are going to a lot of point-to-point flying today. The Saab 340s and things like that, the twin engine prop planes are no longer part of the mix. So just taking off from, say, Aberdeen, landing in Watertown and then flying on to Minneapolis, they're not going to do as much of that anymore. Each one will have their own direct service to Minneapolis. So go ahead. Mm-hmm. Is there any chance of getting more funding on that program? The short answer is yes. We've applied every year for what's called the ATP program. So bipartisan infrastructure law is the federal program you're referring to. They have what's called BIL, AIG, which is Airport Infrastructure Grant. And then they also have ATP, which is Airport Terminal Grant. We did get one of the first ATP grants. It originally was announced at 10.9. They upped it to 11.9. Ever since that, we've applied every year and we haven't gotten selected. They're trying to spread the money around the country. Obviously, you get too many terminal projects going around the country. There's a fundamental funding issue with that. The more projects you have going, I guess everybody is a little bit constructed in the process and everybody still needs more funding. And I think you're going to see some of that coming through. So we're kind of wondering, is we're getting into years 4 and 5 of the allocation of bill funding. We should hear announcements in the coming weeks on Bill 4, which will only leave 1 year left of that funding. So as we see, it's very important to us when we go talk to our Senator Thune, Senator Rounds, we bring that up, just the need for funding that's there. We also have, again, we work very well with our delegation, and we were able to get congressional directed spending, or what we consider CDS. That does follow AIP rules. So the hard thing with CDS is the terminal is only about 48% eligible. So the CDS can only fund within Project 1, part of that 48%, and that's it. So currently today, we've got a $20 million CDS that will be bid in, I mentioned the phases and projects. Project 1, Phase 2 will be part of bidding that CDS 20 million. But then we already know that Senator Rounds and Senator Thune have already inserted another $10 million on the heels of that for the bill that's currently in Congress. So once that passes, and what we've been told is nothing's really going to change as we roll through and we have the election and things change, and that the bills are kind of what they are. There's going to be no more CDSs added to this, so they're not going to wipe everything out, start over again. They're going to maintain what's in the bill. So we've been in that bill for probably a year now, as we've been working through some of the continued resolutions that are there. Once they pass that bill, that 10 million will be available, but it's only to those projects that are AIP eligible. So regardless, when you look at it, we as a community, just in Project 1, are probably going to be looking at about close to $40 million in local costs just on Project 1, that we've got to put into it as part of the local share. It's just ineligible for federal funding, if that makes sense. Good question. Is there any state money involved in the project? Again, in the news, Dan Lettler from Sioux Falls, their airport director, and I have been working very hard. We've brought bills every year for the last, I think, 3, maybe 4 years now, in an effort to get funding to the terminals, because Dan is also doing some terminal projects as well. Last year was the first year the legislature agreed to $10 million to go to airport terminal infrastructure statewide. Of that, we got allotted about $3.8 million. There were some other airports around the state. Sioux Falls got some, Spearfish got some, I think Watertown got allocated like $1 million. So they did sprinkle that around the state, but our request on that was for almost $90 million in state funding on that. So we will continue to work through, and you will see a bill coming to the legislature again this year. So I spend most of my winter at session when they're at session. So educating these projects and those kinds of things. Thank you. I appreciate that. It's part of the fun of my job. So great questions. Thank you. Any other questions? Oh, okay. You guys are the hardest for me to see.
Yes. Outside, second one is these improvements in the larger planes help with the cost of fares.
It's almost like I predicted some of these questions. No. Yep. The hotel piece we are looking at. It's on. I have kind of my board in my office, my whiteboard of things that we intend to get to as part of the process. We'll likely RFP, do a request for proposals for a company to come in and build a hotel. I don't know yet when that's going to be. The issue that we run into is sanitary and just water in general. We've located where the hotel will go. Unfortunately, we can't do it as conveniently as how Sioux Falls has theirs right next to their terminal building. We're probably going to have to go to the opposite side of the parking lots in an effort to do that. But we do see that as a very viable source to be able to get that done. Typically with a hotel with an airport, they'll build all the infrastructure and then they'll agree. We'll give them use of the land. They'll agree to like a 5% per room concession fee that they would pay the airport over time. It's probably going to cost us close to $2 million to put in the sewer and water piece to be able to make that a reality. So we're trying to balance the needs, parking, building, sewer line for that. You know, if only, I mean, money solves every problem right now. And that's part of the issue that we run into here is just our ability to be able to handle it all and finance it all is more of the challenge, or I'd build it all tomorrow. So, let's see, the second half of your question was ticket prices, fares. Yep. So the one big piece with fares, when you talk about that, is we don't have a lot of competition in our market. You saw fares drop to Minneapolis because you saw Sun Country come into the market and two airlines flying the same route. I always tell people the airport is like the mall. We build infrastructure, we maintain infrastructure, we plow runways, roads, those kinds of things, but we don't price your ticket. So like Sears, you know, pricing your Levi's, we give Delta, United a place to do business. We don't tell them how to do business. They get the quiet enjoyment of operating on the space. So we don't have a lot of say into what it is that they charge for their ticket prices. But like any good market, competition will drive that. So if you have someone else who's coming in and they're going to fly, let's say Alaska comes in, they're going to fly Seattle, it's probably not going to do a lot for the ticket prices. And chances are, but for the ticket prices, they wouldn't be flying from Rapid City to Seattle. But they know they can get that amount of revenue for the route. That's what makes it attractive for them. Where you see it is Chicago, where we've got American and United flying head to head. Now Delta, where they're flying against Sun Country. It's when you have competition in the same market. We're talking to Frontier right now, and I'll tell you, I talk to a lot of airlines. Megan, who's in the back of the room, she's the head of marketing and air service development at the airport here. She was just out meeting with SkyWest and Allegiant. We meet usually yearly with Southwest Airlines, United, Delta, American, all them. And these are all topics of conversation. But it's typically where we see you have to have two airlines really competing to start to lower down the prices. We're working on trying to get Frontier, a meeting with Frontier right now, and get them potentially into the market for Denver. We know that if they can bring the ticket prices down in Denver, you're going to see an explosion. There's 3 times the number of passengers per day each way going to Denver, but we need cheap fares to be able to do that. So if we can get that accomplished through for Denver service and get Frontier in here, we know it's going to have an effect on the growth of passengers and actually lower that Denver fare to a reasonable fare. So those are the things that we try and work on. But we do in a small market like ours, Bismarck's our most comparable, you know, for the size population that we serve. We do have a somewhat inelastic market. Where we get our growth is from the communities that are coming in. That's why we're twice the size as Bismarck. So, but we're still a small city in the eyes of the carriers, just with some big benefits. So sorry, if I step forward, I can get in front of the lights and I can see you guys a little bit better. Go ahead.
Back to that Denver connection, where the Frontier.
So we do use a lot of cell phone data. It's kind of the creepy piece of it that, you know, people don't necessarily like the tracking side of it, but it is very effective. Actually, we leak very little. We actually only leak about 18% total. Most of that is leaked to Denver. People driving down there, family of 5 can save a considerable amount to take their family trip. Can't really blame those folks for doing it because but for that, they probably wouldn't be able to take that trip. So, you know, we understand there is going to be some need for that. If you're in Michigan, chances are your airport's leaking 55% and we leak 18. So you kind of get to that de minimis point where it gets to be very hard to be everything to everybody. You're just going to lose some of them. So, but in terms of Gillette, we don't lose. We actually gain far more from there than we lose out of the deal. Megan. So Megan brings up the question that she had for those online is some of the challenges that the regional airlines are having. Most of the time when you're flying like Delta, you're actually flying SkyWest. You're really not flying Delta. SkyWest is based out of St. George. We were just, Megan and I were just there last week. Pilot supply and aircraft supply are an issue right now. So as we looked at part of the dip I mentioned back on one of the slides, in the recovery phase of it. Oh, come on, I didn't think it was that far back. You see a soft piece of the market. They've had to change how they train pilots, the amount of time that they've taken, because the retirements have outpaced the pilot training piece of it. So we're seeing that pilot supply is suffering as a result of that. So we may meet with a carrier and they say, we really want to serve you, but we don't have any pilots. We really want to serve you, but Boeing isn't making our aircraft fast enough. And as we're seeing transitions away from the 50 and 70 seat regional jets, the demand for airplanes and what's going to be the next generation small community airplane, there really wasn't a lot of planning for that size aircraft once the 50-seater went away. Once the 18, 19 seat Saab 340s went away, they didn't really plan for that in the industry because it was kind of like they were fuel efficient until they weren't. And now we're getting to the point where it's more fuel efficient to put more people in an airplane than less. So they're wanting to do that. But then you end up in a balance problem where a community the size of Watertown can't really fill a 100 to 150 seat airplane in one piece. So there's a segment of the market that's really missing right now that would very much even help us out in Rapid City for that 100 seat airplane between some cities like LA, San Francisco, some of these markets where maybe we don't have 150 per day each way, but we're pushing that 100 per day each way. We can be able to get service to some of those markets and keep it profitable for the carriers. So there's always kind of a balance there. And these are some of the discussions that we have with the airlines each time we go to visit them in their environments. Thanks, Megan. Good. Yep. Because they're just not flying them anymore. They're just going away. And the other piece of it is I'm sure there's a sweet spot at which they're profitable for those 50 people that are in the airplane. I don't know what that is. The airlines typically hold the cards on the profitability per seat that comes out of it. So we would love to do that, but we're not an airline. You got to convince someone like SkyWest to actually do that. And it's not been something that's been very receptive. But I mean, it does get brought up for sure. Sure. I'm a pilot too. I always live by there's no reason to jump out of a perfectly good airplane. In that case, yep, save some time. Any more questions? Any questions from online? Very good. Well, hi, Joe, by the way. Hi, Dwyers. I see you guys in the room here. Thanks for coming. I appreciate everybody coming along. Hopefully some of this was worthwhile information for you. And as always, I'm available to answer questions after, and feel free to reach out to me any other time as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Patrick. So as I said, we do this every third Tuesday. So next month, the date is November 19th. And the presentation is going to be on glassmaking, presented by Dr. Katrina Donovan, who is in our Materials and Metallurgical Engineering Department, and Dr. Matthew Whitehead, who is in our Department of Humanities, Arts, and Social Sciences. So they're going to talk about how they are integrating glassmaking into certain classes on campus, talk about the history of glassmaking. It'd be cool if there was a demonstration, but I don't know. That involves heat and I don't know. Anyway, so November 19th, 6 p.m. Hope to see you here.